We are going to burn you to ashes.
You have. If you have 200,
I give you my word.
150.
मैं जुबान देता हूँ.
Bomb us 200 times.
तुम सबको जलाया जाएगा.
So this is happening. Hello. It would appear that the two nuclear powers that everyone forgets are nuclear powers might be using said nuclear powers in the near future. I'm of course talking about Pakistan and India, who I have been told by other people on YouTube are potentially going to war with each other again as of making this video. And since I began this script, Pakistan started shooting at India along the border. So let's see where this goes. If they've already gone to full-scale war by the time this video goes out, well, I hope at least both sides have fun. But today, I want to focus more on the old Pakistan. You might have heard of Pakistan from being the bad guys in the Bollywood version of Top Gun, and where Chris Pratt crashed a helicopter trying to look for Osama bin Laden. I want to see what kind of gear and weapons they use, what their strategies are, and in the end, how a war between them and India might look like. Become a Pilot Grape, the like and subscribe button, and let's talk about it. Now, quick background on the current situation. April 22nd, 2025, 26 Indian tourists in Kashmir are killed in what appears to be a religiously motivated terrorist attack. India accuses Pakistan of backing the group that claimed responsibility, Pakistan denies it, and asked for proof. And now we have the personification of that one video of the two guys yelling at each other on the side of the road. Except that both countries have some of the biggest militaries in the world, a bunch of nukes, and a history of going to war with each other. But why does it matter that this happened in Kashmir specifically? Well, both countries hold part of it, and both claim that they own all of it, and they've already gone to war multiple times over this fact. Not just in real life, but also my comment sections, so I'm going to be posting this map as rage bait. As of January 2025, Pakistan has about 654,000 full-time active duty personnel, and around 550,000 in reserves. While their constitution does have the option for mobilizing a draft of military-aged peoples, they've never had an issue keeping the ranks full through an all-volunteer force. Depending on the sources used and how you define Pakistan's reserves, they hover around the 6th to 9th largest military force in the whole world. 31,000 are in the Navy, 70,000 in the Air Force, about 380,000 in various paramilitary forces, and finally in the Army, by far being the largest, 560,000 personnel. Pakistan is primarily focused on threats directly along their borders. The Afghanistan border has historically proven to be an issue, with it being a pretty active hotspot of violence, and the infamous Korangal Valley, aka the Valley of Death, connecting to it. Additionally, despite the US tapping out from fighting over there for a few years now, Afghan militants continue to attempt to infiltrate into Pakistan, with dozens of insurgents killed by Pakistani forces almost monthly still, and you gotta appreciate their determination. Iran and Pakistan regularly engage in tit-for-tat fighting along their border, largely due to religious and historical/political sectarian differences, but nothing that points towards the two going into full-scale war anytime soon. Pakistan and China share a border, but they like each other. And of course, there's the border with India, where anywhere between 70 and 80% of the entire Pakistani military is posted at any given time. This region also remains their biggest existential threat, so it makes sense to A, station forces there, and B, primarily focus on their army and air force branches rather than trying to build a fleet of aircraft carriers and shoot billion-dollar missiles at $200 Houthi drones. Visually, the Pakistani military looks fairly British in aesthetics. However, in terms of actual operation, it leans more towards the American way of organizing. Compared to India, it has significantly fewer artifacts from its time as a British colony, at least in their military. The United States and Pakistan's relationship tends to be a little all over the place, to put it lightly, with them both actively helping and occasionally actively fighting NATO troops. Not to mention that little excursion we had to do in Abbottabad once, but that's neither here nor there. In terms of equipment used, they've sourced gear and weapons from pretty much everywhere in the world. A large majority of their individual weapon systems are licensed built by the POF, or Pakistan Ordnance Factory, a major defense contractor in the country. These include G3 rifles, modified versions of the PGS-1, and MG3s. Seems like they got a taste for the German stuff. For more specialized units that need better gear, Pakistan will simply buy them directly from other countries in small batches, like M4s, P90s, Glocks, and main portable ATGMs. You'll find older Chinese Type 56s still floating around in more second line and paramilitary units, but your average Pakistani grunt is going to be rocking a G3. That might sound fairly outdated when basically the rest of the world stopped using them decades ago. However, the larger 7.62 NATO round fired from them performs better at longer range than most intermediate cartridges. And that's the kind of fighting they would be engaged with India, given the varied and often mountainous terrain in and around the border region. Are their rifles better than the G3? Yeah. But does it get the job done? Also yeah. Plus, G3s are absolutely drippier than another AR-10 platform rifle that's the same color as baby shit, so there's that to consider. If you look at a Pakistani infantry formation, you're not going to see a lot of body armor, night vision, or rifle optics beyond iron sights, except for specialized troops. But the same goes for India, so it kind of evens out in that regard. Now, when we start getting into bigger military equipment like tanks and planes, we have to take a brief international relations detour to talk about the Sino-Pakistan relationship. This word means China, by the way. Could I have said Chinese-Pakistani relations? I absolutely could. But because I said Sino, it reminds you that I did in fact go to college once. China and Pakistan are really close. It's like that Pakistani meme about the two guys not being friends anymore, except that they are friends all the time. And there are two very good reasons for this. Number one, Pakistan's coastline is important to China because it gives them a direct overland link to ocean access via the CPEC, where the United States, Japan, and Korea have less of a presence and could be important in a hypothetical invasion of Taiwan in order to maintain international economic output to fuel their war economy. And number two, they both hate India. And that second one is a lot simpler than the first one. For China, Pakistan is a way to leverage strategic influence against India without having to actively do it themselves. The more that India is occupied by their hatred of Pakistan, which seems to be one of their national pastimes, the less time they're occupied with their hatred of China. So what does Pakistan get out of this? Sweet military technology cooperation programs. Pakistan was one of the first adopters of Chinese weapons when China started exporting them, and as we all know, your first time is always very special. All of that brings us to the Al-Khalid-1 main battle tank, the first vehicle we'll be talking about, and one that was co-created by Pakistan's HIT group and China's Norinco. These are upgraded versions of the original Al-Khalid tank, first entering service in 2020. Pakistan currently operates about 600 of these types of tanks, both the old and the new kind, with China currently developing the Al-Khalid-2, which, as the name implies, will be a second upgraded version specifically for Pakistan. These are, if we're being honest with ourselves, just another modern T-Series tank. It uses a 125mm cannon with a stabilized gun, hunter killer thermal sights, laser rangefinders, an autoloader, 3 crew members, and if you read Pakistani news sources, it can one-shot an Indian T-90S without even blinking, even though the T-90S, in a practical battlefield sense, is essentially the exact same vehicle. One interesting thing about these tanks specifically is that they have the exact same 6TD2 diesel engine found in the T-80UD, which is a Ukrainian-made tank that Pakistan bought 320 of back in 1997. And if there's one thing that gets me fired up, it's when macro-logistical decisions are made that provide redundancy in the acquisition and maintenance process for armored vehicles. If there are any doctors watching that specialize in autism, this is my special interest. Pakistan also rocks the Al-Zarar, which is a slightly upgraded Type 59, which itself is just a Chinese version of the T-54A, and, well, these suck, like really bad these days, so they're relegated to secondary units and reserves. But these are being replaced by the Chinese VT-4, which are newer, but also roughly on par with the first tank we talked about. They also use a couple thousand M113s and a handful of upgraded ones called Talhals, but that's putting lipstick on a pig, so moving on. The takeaway here is that Pakistan has an older military that they are slowly upgrading with joint ventures with China for newer stuff. One of the biggest shifts away from this equipment that came from the old US of A and more towards a shift towards the PR of C is in their Air Force. For many years, essentially since they made their way to the country in 1983, Pakistan has been rocking the American F-16. In a lot of ways, it became a very symbolic capability, because it was seen as a decisive edge against India's Air Force, which used older Soviet aircraft. Unrelated to the aircraft itself, I found this sick Pakistani news video that makes the anchors look like they're in some early 2000s video game control room, and it's just rad as hell. Also, this video was made last month, which makes it even better. But as the blurry man on the screen is stating, the F-16 is losing the limelight to the new FJ-17 Thunder. This is a 4th generation multi-role aircraft, similar to the F-16, made via a joint Chinese and Pakistan venture. These are gradually replacing the older Mirage and F-7s in service, but have one very important feature that's not even an actual feature of the plane itself. Pakistan can upgrade these things all they want. Pakistan cannot upgrade these very much due to American technology restrictions. Plus, if Pakistan were to do something like, I don't know, deploy a nuclear bomb against an anonymous neighboring country, and oh shoot, let's just say the United States was a little ticked off that happened and wanted to do a little sanctioning, well, now those sanctions won't affect your fighter fleet. This is all hypothetical, of course, just the way she goes. The Pakistani Air Force only has 4 aerial refueling aircraft, which is pretty small compared to the number of planes they operate, but not really an issue due to the fact that if they're going to war anytime soon, it's probably just across their own border. Similar to the Army, the Air Force is gradually replacing old stuff with joint Chinese designs, but have also placed an emphasis on building up their AWACS and drone fleet. Now, Pakistan's Navy is the smallest of the 3 branches, and that makes sense considering all of their threats are connected to their own borders. The primary job of the Pakistani Navy is coastal defense in deep waters. What that translates to are 4 old French submarines, which are being replaced by new Chinese ones, and a focus on ships like the Barber class and Zulfikar classes that are designed to punch above their weight and directly counter Indian naval supremacy. The goal is to mitigate India's naval advantage, not necessarily dominate the 7 seas. Now, the Barber classes are interesting in that they're stealth frigates designed to fire anti-ship missiles, with the goal of getting a first strike capability on Indian naval formations, while the new Chinese Hangor-class submarines target the high payoff targets like India's 2 aircraft carriers. Now, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force are the only main branches in Pakistan's military. They don't have puddle pirates, or space nerds, or cult members who have to use their finger to read. That joke was directed at the officer corps of the Marines, by the way. And they all fall under the Joint Staff Headquarters, in the same way the United States has a Joint Chief Staff. But there are paramilitary groups that, during peacetime, do not directly fall under the Joint Staff, but during wartime, they would, and serve as an augmentation force with more specific training and mission sets. First, you have the Rangers. These guys fall under the Ministry of the Interior and have about 40 to 45,000 personnel. These are the main guys protecting the Pakistani border during peacetime and conduct counter-terrorism mission sets. During the event of a war, they would provide security along the international line of control, as well as augment rear security and urban defense to help hunt down any Indian secret squirrel operations that might be going on. Indian squirrels look like this, in case you were wondering. Fighting along them is the Mujahid force, which generally does the same role, with a bit more emphasis on the border than rear security, and they specialize in things like skirmishing, raids, and infiltration. They're well trained, but not quite as well armed as their Ranger cousins. Next, you have the Frontier Corps, with about 100,000 personnel in total. These guys will be tasked with protecting strategic hotspots. Think air bases, major roadways, airports, power stations, anything that have taken over or destroyed by Indian forces would be an issue, that's where you'll find them. Their training varies from moderately okay to mildly not okay, and in terms of equipment, they're going to be getting a lot of leftovers from the Army's stockpile. They do get Toyota Hilux technicals though, so it's not all bad. Finally, you have the Pakistani National Guards, which largely operate in the same way that American National Guards do. These guys are reservists, but specialize specifically in mountain warfare, and are generally recruited from populations already acclimated to high-altitude conditions. Now, with all of that said, how would a war between Pakistan and India, that might have already started by the time this video is released, go? What would that look like? Kind of okay is the answer. Now first, I'm gonna have to make some assumptions. And by that, I mean Preston Stewart said that India would probably strike first, so we're gonna go with that. Given how things are currently going, we're going to assume that India would be the first ones to send people over the border. The most likely course of action would be a very strong coordinated attack by India as far deep into Pakistan as possible, along multiple fronts. Armored columns would focus on the more open terrain, while light infantry in the more mountainous areas. The goal would be a quick, decisive blow in order to seize as many military targets as possible and try to avoid a drawn-out conflict, which could lead to nuclear escalation. This is consistent with India's cold start doctrine. Additionally, using their air force, they would be attempting to quickly establish air supremacy using a combination of ground strikes against Pakistani air defenses and aircraft using long-range standoff munitions. There really isn't a realistic scenario where India doesn't manage to take land from Pakistan. They have the sheer numbers and technical abilities to make it happen. On the ground, India would likely leverage its superior numbers of armored vehicles and artillery to its advantage. Most experts agree that this first spearhead would attempt to seize somewhere between 15 and 20 kilometers before they stop and start to dig in. That would be enough to essentially claim a quote victory while keeping below the threshold of nuclear retaliation. India's ability to perform this initial spearhead is fairly accepted pending the source you pull from. The issue becomes, can they hold it? Pakistan permanently stations most of its military along the border. India, however, does not, meaning very quickly it would likely turn into a war of attrition, with India being at the disadvantage of extending the logistics lines. The issue then becomes one of time. Add into this that the various terrorist organizations that kicked off the conflict are likely also going ham right now and inflicting damage on Indian formations with guerrilla tactics. Plus, at this point, they're either encouraged or just outright being armed by Pakistan to increase their effectiveness. And herein lies the little fun fact. Every time India and Pakistan have gone to war with each other in the past, it's only lasted a few weeks. Pakistan might have a smaller military, but being on the defensive would allow them to inflict a disproportionately high number of casualties. Because these are both nuclear-armed militaries, a lot of it comes down to just politics. Neither side is likely to engage in long-term, multi-month fighting, and international pressures to broker a peace would be incredible given that nukes are on the table. Brokering peace between India and Pakistan was one of the few times the Soviet Union and the United States actually worked together towards a common geopolitical goal. The real question is, what would China be doing in all of this? Obviously, China would be siding with Pakistan, but they would likely do everything in their power to avoid a nuclear exchange, because it's in their backyard and obviously that is not ideal. They've also invested billions into Pakistan that would literally go up in smoke if the war got too spicy. They would likely provide intelligence and non-lethal military aid to Pakistan. I say specifically non-lethal because while the United States doesn't want to isolate Pakistan diplomatically, they would also prefer a better outcome for India. If China starts supplying stuff to Pakistan that shoots and goes boom, the US would probably start pulling some diplomatic levers that would not favor them. The question is, how much would China support Pakistan in the war? Because every time a Pakistani RPG blows up an Indian tank, that's one less Indian tank that they would have to blow up with their knockoff of a Javelin. And it's also the perfect excuse to beef up military infrastructure along their own border with India, and likely push forward a bit into the international line of control as a quote, buffer zone. Ultimately, the most likely scenario, given a war between the two countries, is a push to seize upwards of 20 kilometers inward of territory by India, where they would be successful in some areas and fail in others. What would follow would be a brutal counterattack by Pakistan to retake terrain where they would inevitably be successful in some areas and fail in others. China would publicly denounce the war while using it as a way to gain geopolitical leverage in the region, while also making sure it doesn't go nuclear. And eventually, a bunch of UN nerds come in, negotiate a truce, and the borders either literally don't change at all, or they change so little that you would need an 8K monitor in order to get a screen resolution high enough to notice it. Historically speaking, since 1948, when the two countries go to war, India pushes in, takes a bunch of land, and then immediately gives it back once another country tells them to. Then both countries are incredibly worse off for decades, their economic growth retarded. That's the proper use of the word, by the way. Hundreds of thousands are either killed, wounded, or displaced, and we get another round of satire-worthy nationalist movies out of the whole thing. All that is to say is that when these two countries go to war, no one wins. There's just varying degrees of losing. A decisive win by one side is still going to tank their economy, cost thousands of lives, displace millions, all just to return to the original international borders. So can Pakistan win a war against India? No. But India can't win a war against Pakistan either. I feel like that radical centrist meme guy right now, but not in a good way. Maybe I should have just picked a side and gone all in. Oh well, I'm sure there's going to be a next time. And on that note, thank you for watching. Please subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.